that humans were just nomads or cavemen to the present time, water is a very important ingredient of life. And so the prehistoric people settled on the banks of rivers, and slowly later civilizations all prospered here. Can you see on the screen? Can we do anything without water? No. You can see hunters, you can see tribes people, you can see settlements, and you can see city planning. Is anything possible without water? No. And what was the only form of water during that period? Rivers, lakes, or oceans. What is from where do you get water? The main form was rivers, which used to replete during rainy seasons. So, the river banks became the cradles of ancient civilizations. Almost all the civilizations arose and developed in river valleys only. Here in this lesson, we are going to learn about ancient civilizations. Now, can you tell me what are the reasons for these rivers to be the cradles of ancient civilization? The first one, fertile lands. Whenever there is a river nearby, the lands are fertile because once in a while when the rivers flood, they leave back thick alluvium soil. Second, man needs water for each and every basic need. So automatically the areas around the river became dense and populated. Third, man used to have lot of cattle and other kind of farm animals for which again he needed water. And housing materials such as clay, stone and wood, everything are abundant only when they are near a river. And transportation, more than by land, transportation was very easy by a river. So all these are the reasons why the rivers are known as the cradles of ancient civilizations. Fertile lands, water availability, facility for rearing cattle, housing material and transportation. In this lesson, we are going to learn about ancient civilizations. And we can see that all these civilizations exist on the river banks. Chronologically, we have the Egyptian civilization, which is established on the banks of river Nile. Then we have the Mesopotamian civilization on the banks of river Euphrates and Tigris. The Chinese civilization on the banks of Wangho and Sikiang, and Harappan civilization on the banks of Indus River. What are the civilizations we are going to learn about, children? Egyptian civilization, Mesopotamian civilization, Chinese civilization and Harappan civilization. What can you see on the screen? You can see a map of ancient civilizations. Where can you see Egyptian civilization? Yes, you can see it in the portion of Africa. Can you see Mesopotamian civilization there, children? Yes, and you can see Indus civilization and Chinese civilizations. Can you now relate to which part of the world these civilizations have been existing? Now let's learn about them one by one. The first civilization we are going to learn about is the Egyptian civilization. Quite interesting, children. Shall we start learning? Ancient Egypt was a civilization of the ancient North Africa concentrated along the lower reaches of the Nile River. It is the place which is now we called as Egypt. Can you see on the map? This Africa, and on the left corner of the map you can find Egypt. Can you see those arrows pointing out to Nile and to the word Egypt? Now, Egypt is also considered as the first civilization of the ancient world. Which is the first civilization, children? Egyptian civilization. It is considered as the first civilization of the world. Now, this civilization took birth on the banks of river Nile, as you can see the Nile flowing through Egypt. The Nile is also the longest river in the world, children. Later on, when we are learning about Africa, we will learn about Egypt and Nile and all the river in detail. Now, it is important for you to know that Egyptian civilization took its birth on the banks of river Nile, and this river Nile is the longest river in the world. Now, when we are learning Africa, you will find out that the places in North Africa, Northwestern Africa, Northeastern Africa are all totally desert regions. But Egypt alone is not a desert like the rest of the Northern Africa because of this river Nile flowing through it. Do you understand, children? If river Nile had not flown through Egypt, it would have become a desert. That is why Egypt is considered as the gift of Nile. Do you understand, children? Why is Egypt considered as a gift of Nile? If Egypt did not flow through, if Nile did not flow through Egypt, it would have become a desert. So Nile is considered as the gift, and it is also known as the jewel of Egypt. Okay, children, which is the first civilization of the ancient world? Egyptian civilization. And why is Egypt considered gift of Nile? Because if there was no Nile, there is no Egypt. Have you understood, children? Now let us learn in detail. Now let us learn about the political history of Egypt. Now the first thing we have to learn is that the dynasties rose in Egypt around 5,400 years ago. Naturally, it is the first civilization. The most important thing is the kings of Egypt were known as pharaohs. We have heard of emperors and so on, right? But the kings were known as pharaohs. What is the literal meaning of a pharaoh? Pharaoh means a person who lives in a palace and who is blessed by god Osiris. That is why they were called as pharaohs. And Narmer was the first king who unified Egypt by the means of conquering northern Egypt and southern Egypt. He brought it under one unification, and he renamed himself as Menes. So who was the first pharaoh? Menes was the first pharaoh, and he was the one who created this term pharaoh. The moment Menes became the pharaoh, he made Memphis as its capital. What was the capital of Menes? Memphis. Now, this was the capital of ancient Egypt during the Old Kingdom and remained a very important city throughout the Egyptian history. The most important thing is it was occupying a very strategic position. It was very near the mouth of Nile River's delta. Automatically, there was a lot of food and there was a lot of merchandise for them to have a wonderful trade. And during the golden period, Memphis was the place which was also a religious center. This Memphis is also believed to be under the protection of god Ta. Now there is a great temple there which is known as Hat Ka Ta, which means the enclosure of the god Ta. And the name of this temple in Greek is known as Ai-Gai-Tos. This is the word from which the new name or the English name of Egypt rose. What was the name of the temple? Ai-Gai-Tos. From this, it became anglicized into Egypt. There were many pharaohs who ruled Egypt after Menes. You have the Djoser, the Khufu, Tutmos I, Tutmos II, Hatshepsut, Tutmos III, Amenhotep, Akhenaten, Tutankhamun, and Ramses II. There were so many pharaohs, but among all these pharaohs, Khufu, Amenhotep, and Themos or Tutmos were the most important pharaohs. Who were the most important pharaohs after Menes? Khufu, Amenhotep, and Themos. The Egyptians built pyramids, and the largest pyramid of Giza was built by the pharaoh Khufu. Children, we will talk about all about the pyramids, how they are built, what they are later on when we are talking about the contributions of the Egyptians. But now you should understand that the tomb of Khufu is known as the Pyramid of Giza, and it is the largest pyramid. The next famous pharaoh was Amenhotep. He expanded his kingdom by establishing an empire based on his conquests. He was more interested in suppressing the warring tribes and bringing more peace to Egypt. He had also started building many temples to the north side of Egypt. After him, the most famous pharaoh was Themos. Among all the later pharaohs, he was quite famous, and he had also given a lot of contribution in the field of literature and architecture and art. And he was followed by his daughter Hatshepsut. Now, till then, all the pharaohs were only men. Usually, the son succeeded the father, and all the pharaohs were men. But Hatshepsut was the first woman to ascend the throne as a pharaoh of Egypt. Hence, she is known as the first empress of the world. Who was known as the first empress of the world? Hatshepsut. Finally, about 2300 years ago, Alexander the Great, the king of Macedonia, he conquered Egypt. See, Alexander was a great warrior who went on conquering many places and bringing it under his control. He had also invaded India. Do you remember, children, that we had learned when we were learning the important dynasties of North India, that during Chandragupta Maurya's period, Chandragupta Maurya had fought against Seleucus Nicator, who was the general of Alexander. Now we learn about Alexander again in the Egyptian civilization. Just as he had gone everywhere in bringing things under his control, he came to Egypt also and he brought it under his control. As usual, he did not stay there, but he went back and he appointed Ptolemy as his representative. When Alexander went back to his kingdom, Ptolemy declared himself as the king of Egypt and he started the dynasty which is known as the Ptolemy's dynasty. And the most famous person after Ptolemy in the Ptolemy's dynasty was Cleopatra. Now let us learn about Cleopatra. She was the original descendant of Ptolemy, who was a Macedonian Greek and the general and companion of Alexander. Now, Cleopatra later on became the royal wife of Julius Caesar of Rome. When you go to your higher classes, you will be learning about Roman civilizations. Actually, you had Roman civilizations this year, but it is in the deleted portions. Julius Caesar, when he came to Egypt and captured it, he married Cleopatra and reinstated her as the queen of Egypt. After the death or after the assassination of Julius Caesar, Cleopatra became the wife of Antony and continued to rule Egypt. After her death, Egypt became a part of the Roman province. That is why Cleopatra is considered as the last ruler of independent Egypt. So, who's the famous queen? Cleopatra. And she's the last ruler of the independent Egypt. And after her death, it became a part of the Roman province. Children, I have explained so much about the political history of Egypt, but when you see the important points, you will not be having all that in points form. It is just for you to have an understanding about the Egyptian civilization that I've given you extra information regarding the political history. It will help you in different GK exams and so on. There is one particular aspect of this civilization which is rather very pathetic. That is the system of slavery. Children, when we learnt about human rights, we learnt that no human being can make another human being as their slaves. That is the basic human right. But Egyptian civilization had the pathetic form of slavery. All prisoners were considered as slaves, and humans were bought and sold in open market as slaves. Any child born to the slave continued to be a slave throughout their life also. What was the main reason of using these slaves was to build pyramids. Now, pyramids were huge structures. We learn about the pyramids later, but the slaves were used in building pyramids and in doing all hard tasks. The elite of the society ill treated them, did not feed them, and they were whipped if they did not do their work properly. From Egypt, slowly the slavery system spread to the rest of the world. Every civilization has something to contribute to the world. Each and every civilization has its unique contributions. Shall we learn about the contributions of the Egyptian civilizations now? The first contribution we are going to see is about agriculture. Now, slowly over the course of time, the Egyptians understood and they were able to predict as to when the river valley would be flooded and when the water would abate. So, the success of this civilization depended upon their ability to adapt to the conditions of River Nile. Now, every time it was flooded and the water abated, it left a very rich layer of soil. This led to wonderful irrigation and it created fertile valley to produce lot of crops and which supported a dense population. So the main success of the ancient civilization was their capability to adapt to the conditions of the river valley. The Egyptians built lot of canals and they created a wonderful network of irrigation. So wheat and barley were the food crops which were grown in surplus. They managed to channel the water of Nile into all this for irrigation purpose. In general, men and women had different roles in the societies, but in ancient Egypt, not like the other civilization, women were considered as men's equal under the law. Just like men, women could run business, they could borrow money, and they could own property. Not much of the women were educated and they did not become scribes or they did not work in the government, but they were able to run their household. They had a lot of servants to do their work. They started owning their business. They ran perfume shops. You know that ancient Egypt is very famous for perfumes and chemicals. Women took up all this kind of position, and it is also quite clear that they rose sometimes all the way to become the priestess or even the pharaoh. Some of the women were priests. It was considered to be an honor to work in the temples of Egypt. And we have two famous women as the pharaohs of Egypt. Can you name them, children? Yes, Hatshepsut and Cleopatra. The first thing which comes to your mind when you say the word Egypt is the word mummy, isn't it? I'm sure you've all seen that movie called Mummy, and you can imagine all ghosts and all that. Shall we learn about the mummies now? The Egyptians believed in life after death. So they felt that if the person was born again, what would they do for a body? So they preserved the body by applying chemicals and wrapping it up in thin cotton clothes. But before that, they removed all the other organs and put them up in jars. And they wrapped the body in some kind of chemical. This preserved the bodies over a long period of time. This process of preserving the body is known as mummification. So, what is mummification? The process of applying chemicals and preserving the dead bodies is known as mummification, and this process was introduced by the Egyptians. And such dead bodies were known as the mummies. See, generally, the pharaohs were all mummified along with some of their soldiers, their wives, and some of their generals. You can see that on top of some of these mummy tombs, you can find all the good deeds which these people have done. It will be all drawn. It says that later on, when God comes and calls them, he could see all the good deeds committed by this particular person. Do you know the tombs were filled with these mummies in their coffins? And they were all elaborately carved and they used to be kept along with the jars which contained the organs of the bodies. And some of the items which was used by these people were buried along with their bodies. We spoke about agriculture and we spoke about the position of slaves, women, and the process of mummification. Now let us learn about the religion. Now, Egyptians had a large number of gods. They believed in gods for each and every element, and the most important were the sun and the river. Even in our civilization, we know we still pray to the Lord Sun Aditya, don't we, children? Same way, the Egyptians prayed to sun and river. From this, you can understand that their main trade was agriculture. Can you have agriculture? Can you have plants growing without the blessings of sun and water in the form of river? So they prayed to the river god Sun, who was known as Amun Ra or simply Ra. You can see on the screen how they offered the prayer to the sun god. And the river goddess was Anuket. She was known as the goddess of the Nile River, and it is said that each and every time the Nile flooded, Anuket was embracing them and giving them new life. So, who was the sun god? Amun Ra or just Ra, and who was the river goddess? Anuket. In ancient Egypt, each and every city had its own guardian god or goddess. There are so many gods followed by them. Some of them are on the screen for you. Ra, Geb, Nul, Isis, Osiris, Tab, Thoth, Neith, Amun, Hathor, Sekhmet, and so on. Each and every god was supposed to be of some element, like the element of sun, of sky, the earth, of motherhood, of resurrection, of fertility, of craftsmen. That is, all the traders used to pray to one kind of god, the god of creation, and so on and so forth. They believed in all this god, and each and every city had its own guardian deity, and they built temples for it. One of the most notable and lasting achievements of the ancient Egyptians is their pyramids. The size, the design, the structure all reveal that they were skillful builders. Now, these pyramids were great monuments and they were the tombs. Now, you can just see the outer structure of the pyramid. It is looking triangular, isn't it, children? It is built in an outer triangular form with a step at the top. Now, if you see it from the geometrical sense, you can see that the base of the pyramid could be a trilateral or a quadrilateral or a polygon of any shape. But ultimately, it gives you a three-faced or a four-faced look. That is why they call it as a pyramid. Now, do you know that these pyramids are nothing but the tombs of the pharaohs? Yes, since I told you they believed that there is life after death, they wanted to preserve the body of the pharaohs when they were born again. They were mummified, and on top of them, these tombs were built. And children, there is one more fact. The moment a person becomes a pharaoh, he starts building his own tomb or a pyramid. He continues working on the pyramid till his death. The moment he dies, the work is stopped, he is mummified, and is buried along with all his treasures. And the path inside the pyramid is only known to the builder because they were very scared that the robbers would enter and take away the treasures of the pharaohs. Why do you think the Giza pyramid is so big? That means the king ruled or the pharaoh ruled for a long period of time. The more length their ruling was, the more bigger the pyramids became. The small pyramids meant that the pharaohs ruled only for a short period. The Great Pyramid of Giza is 481 feet high and 775 feet long. And there are other pyramids, like you have the Step Pyramid of King Zoser and other pyramids also which are very famous. But the Giza Pyramid is the largest pyramid. Now have you understood what pyramids are? They are only tombs of pharaohs, and they contain the mummified body of pharaohs with all the treasures which the pharaoh used during his lifetime. Now let us learn about the type of script used by the Egyptians. The ancient Egyptian script was known as hieroglyphics, which literally means sacred writing. Now this is a very unique pictographic form of writing. What is this known as? Hieroglyphics. And what does it mean? Sacred writing. See children, you can see a little bit on the screen. There is a picture of this particular writing on the wall. And that is also blown up in the nearby picture. You can see that it's only drawings. The entire writing is only drawings. And below that you can see the translation. What is a drawing for A, what is a drawing or a symbol they use for B, and so on. And the other side you can see how letters are formed or how sentences are formed by drawing. I watched over is written over there in a drawing form. Very tough to learn. So only artists could learn this type of writing, and scribes and artists thrived in Egypt. So what is the Egyptian script called? Hieroglyphics. Ancient Egyptians were also great mathematicians. As you can see on the screen, without having an excellent knowledge about the different polygons and how to create a unilateral or a quadrilateral kind of constructions, it is impossible if you don't have mathematics idea. They were also excellent in geometry. Here on the screen is a parchment in which they had drawn all geometrical designs in their planning to build the pyramids, like the blueprint of what we use nowadays. We had found, the historians had found a parchment in which it was written. So this shows that the Egyptians had enormous knowledge of geometry. Another attractive Egyptian architecture is a large statue of Sphinx. Now, this is a statue of an animal with the body of a lion and the head of a human. These were known as the statues or sphinx. Now, most of the pyramids near them you can find a sphinx. It is like a guardian for the tomb. and it was also an architectural wonder. Ancient Egyptians wrote their hieroglyphics on papyrus. See, these papyrus is a form of grass which is available on the banks of River Nile. They used to collect the grass and spread it by forcing them and putting weight on them and making pulp out of them. Then they spread it out like what you see on the screen, and on this writings were done. This was known as the ideographic papyrus, and it was found on the banks of River Nile. So the Egyptians were the first to invent this papyrus grass on which ink could be used to create writings. So children, what did we learn today? We learned that the Nile flowed through Egypt, and because of that it did not become a desert. Hence, Egypt is known as the gift of Nile. And we learned that the first pharaoh was Menes. We learned about pyramids. We learned about Alexander the Great, his general Ptolemy, and Cleopatra the queen, the first empress Hatshepsut. Then we learnt about the important contributions of the Egyptians: agriculture, mummification, their prayer to the different kinds of elements gods like the sun god, the river god, the guardian deities, their excellence in geometry, max, in building pyramids, sphinx statues, and also their wonderful writing which is known as hieroglyphics. Did you find the lesson on ancient civilizations very interesting, children? In the next consecutive classes, we'll learn about the other civilizations. Now, please write the important points for Egyptian civilization. See, many of the points which I've discussed in this class may not be in your points because I've just given you more explanation. You can learn from your textbook also, the same points are repeated here. Egypt is the first civilization of the ancient world. It took place on the banks of River Nile. If the Nile had not flown through Egypt, it would have become a desert. Hence, Egypt is considered the gift of Nile. The kings of Egypt were called pharaohs. Menes was the first pharaoh and his capital was Memphis. After Menes, Khufu, Amenhotep, and Thutmose were prominent rulers. The largest pyramid is the Pyramid of Giza and is called the Great Pyramid of Khufu, which was built as a tomb of Khufu. Thutmose was the greatest conqueror, and his daughter Hatshepsut was the first empress of the world. Finally, Alexander the Great conquered Egypt and appointed his general Ptolemy as the representative, who later declared himself the king and started the Ptolemy's dynasty. The popular queen of this dynasty was Cleopatra, who was the last ruler of this dynasty, and after her, Egypt became a province of Rome. The contribution of Egyptian civilization. Wheat and barley were the food crops. The condition of slaves was pathetic. The people of Egypt believed in life after death, so they preserved the dead bodies by a process called mummification, and the dead bodies were called as mummies. In ancient Egypt, each city had its own guardian goddess. Sun and rivers were worshipped. The Egyptian script is known as hieroglyphics, which means sacred writings. They used ink to write on papyrus, grass growing in River Nile. They had enormous knowledge of geometry, which was used in building large pyramids. The statue of Sphinx is the most attractive Egyptian architecture. The Sphinx is an animal with the body of a lion and a human head. Children, we have completed the writing the important points. Now let's do an activity. Please identify the following pictures on the screen. Fill in the blanks. The first civilization of the world is dash. This civilization was born on the banks of river dash. The pharaoh who built the biggest pyramid at Giza was dash. Dash of Greece conquered Egypt. The last queen of Egypt was dash. The statue with the body of a lion and head of a human is dash. Answer the following questions. Which is the longest river in the world? Second, why is Egypt called Gift of Nile? Third, who is a pharaoh? Name the first pharaoh. Fourth, what is mummification? Fifth, name the script of Egyptians and what does it mean? Sixth, who was called the first empress of the world? Children, the answer to these questions and activities will be discussed in the next class. Thank you.